my encounters with Jacob Milgrom, the most significant Jewish authority on all things legal and ceremonial in Israel, began through his writings. And of course, they climaxed when he came out with his massive 3-volume commentary on Leviticus that runs into way over 1,000 pages. He is the world's foremost authority on Leviticus. And so I was working on Ezekiel, who is quite Levitical in his perspectives, and the whole book has a pronounced Levitical frame. So, of course, if you want to understand Ezekiel, you have to understand Leviticus. And that's how I started to appreciate the work of Jacob Milgrom. He has been the most significant contributor to the conversation on Leviticus and all things Levitical in the last 30, 40 years. It came as a surprise to me when one day, out of the blue, I got a letter in the mail asking if I would be interested in reading the manuscript that Jacob Milgrom had just produced. It's a very rough draft yet. He was asked to finish up Moshe Greenberg's commentary on the book of Ezekiel, and unfortunately, Moshe Greenberg's health failed, and he wasn't able to finish it. And when I heard that Milgrom is going to finish these last chapters, I thought, that's perfect. Well, when I received this letter, whether I would read this document and give a response, I was utterly flabbergasted when I started reading, because in the preface, he talks about a conversation he's been having with Daniel Block. How in the world did that happen? I've never talked to the man. I've seen him at professional conferences. I've never introduced myself. And so I was mystified by that. But in any case, as it turns out, eventually the publishers decided not to publish that, and it seemed to me a tragedy that this document that he had produced, probably his last significant published work, would not see the light of day. He was very disappointed when it was rejected, and I was in Cambridge on sabbatical leave at the Cambridge University. And one day, out of the blue, I get a phone call from Israel. Jacob Milgrom's on the line. Would I have time to talk to him? We had an hour-long conversation in which he expressed regret at never having met, but he also expressed great thanks for the conversation he's been having with me. He asked if we could publish this jointly. And by the end of the conversation, I said, well, let's look into this. I'll see what the implications are. I'd never done this before with anybody. So, we came home. Well, 3 months later, I discovered, sadly, Jacob Milgrom has passed away. And that conversation is ended. And my first response was, whoops, that manuscript is gone. I didn't have my copy. I read it and I had to send it back to the publisher, so I wasn't able to keep my copy. So I wondered how I would get a copy of it. I wanted it at least for my kids to see, and they might be happy with what he says about some of my work. And then the following year at SBL, we had a memorial session in honor of Moshe Greenberg, the Ezekiel scholar. And of course, having done my work in Ezekiel, I loved that man's work. He influenced me more than any other person on the book of Ezekiel. And he so encouraged me to let the text speak its own message. In any case, whoever set that memorial session up, wrote and asked if I would do a tribute to Moshe Greenberg, especially focusing on his contribution to Ezekiel studies. Well, it was a great honor. All the other members of the panel were Jewish scholars who have become my close friends, many of them. And so here I was the only goy on that panel. But it was a great honor and a great delight. After it was over, a senior woman and two of her sons approached me and introduced themselves. Jacob's widow. I had never met her. They introduced themselves, and they said they had come over specifically to the conference to talk, to see if there wasn't a way in which we could still get Jacob's last work published. Well, I was incredibly flattered and honored that they should have done this. I pinched myself at the rare privilege that has been mine to have conversations with people like this. And so when I said, okay, let's see where this goes. I mean, they are not biblical scholars, so they don't know how the biblical publishing world works. And so I said, I'll see what I can do with it. And having worked so closely with Whitfenstock in the past, my first response was to write Whitfenstock and see if they might not pick this up. And so the first thing when I got home from the conference, I sent one of the editors at Whitfenstock a note, and next morning when I got up, there's a response. This is a no-brainer. And so they said, let's go for it. But as it turns out, the project was a lot larger than I thought. It was still in very rough shape. And we had to reformat it and whatever else, and there were missing footnotes and what. But it was just a great, great privilege to work again with the ideas of this great scholar and to work very closely with his son, who's a rabbi in Israel, who edited the book, especially being sure that wherever there are allusions to my work, they would be noted, because in the original draft, it was obvious that he was depending to an embarrassing extent on some of my work. He didn't always agree with me, which is great. I love it when people challenge what I'm doing. And so there are lots of places where in his interpretation he went a different direction. But even so, especially in the text critical stuff, he was very grateful for the work that I had done. So his son, Jeremy, did that sort of editing. And when it came out with Whitfenstock, we renamed it more in keeping with the last chapters of the book of Ezekiel. It's chapters 38 to 48. And it was just a great honor to be able to do this with him. And I've had expressions of appreciation from Jewish scholars in many contexts thanking me for this. It's very rare to have people of two totally different faith traditions speaking to each other so sympathetically. Usually we're debating each other, fighting each other. Oh, this was a great honor. I have in the past affirmed so much that what Professor Milgrom has done, and it was just encouraging to see that, I'm just a farm boy from Saskatchewan, from a very poor family, and I was just writing a commentary for the church. And that somebody like that should pick it up and say, this is helpful. Praise be to God. This is another one of those great graces that I have experienced in my life. I'm so grateful for my Jewish friends who have made these kinds of conversations possible. And to this day, in Wheaton, once a semester, we meet, half a dozen or a dozen of us faculty, we meet once a semester with a half a dozen to 10 Jewish rabbis. From 11:30, or is it 11 o'clock to 1:30 over lunch. And we talk scriptures, we talk Bible. We've become such close friends. I treasure these conversations. I've learned so much from them, and they have really affected how I read Scripture. I'm so grateful for that. Jacob Milgrom was a wonderful scholar. Some of his students, I know it's never his students, but some of his students have become my very good friends. And it's through this little project with Whipfenstock. I'm so grateful.